Hey, Being at Work listeners, welcome back to another episode. This is your host, Andrea Butcher. And if you are a regular listener of this feed, you know that the spirit of this show is highlighting our humanness at work. So naturally, we talk a lot about vulnerability on this show. You know, Brené Brown reminds us that vulnerability is the birthplace of connection. So we know that it is our being vulnerable that creates an opening. And yet we live in a world that often encourages us to look good and pretend like we're good and to be good. So all of us as leaders has a responsibility to do the work to figure out what vulnerability looks like for us. And our jumping off points are different. So regardless of who you are, where you are, because you are human, you desire connection, and the people in your life want to connect with you more deeply. So today, we are going to dive into vulnerability at work. And I asked a dear friend to join me for this conversation because more specifically, I want to explore this question. What if men were more vulnerable at work? My guest today, the dear friend that I referenced, is my friend Jeremy King. And when I asked Jeremy this question, he said, if men were more vulnerable at work, it could transform the workplace. I've known Jeremy for over 20 years, and he has been pivotal to my growth as a leader. We were peers at a really interesting time in our careers. We were both supporting a growing organization. We worked side by side for many years. I led operations, Jeremy led sales. So we collaborated daily and had a lot of fun along the way as well. Jeremy is an incredible leader. He's an incredible human. I have immense respect for him. He's a vulnerable leader. And he's also a 50-year-old man who has grown up with the societal pressures of being a strong man. Don't cry, be fearless, lead with strength. So, what if men were more vulnerable at work? Well, listen in as Jeremy and I explore this question from lots of different angles. And one other thing I want to stress as I'm kicking this off, you know, Jeremy and I are going to share today our points of view from our personal experiences. So certainly Jeremy doesn't speak for all men, just as I don't speak for all women. This is just where we are right now based on our individual journeys. So Jeremy King, welcome to Being at Work.
Thanks for having me.
This is a fun moment for me. Just because we've known each other for so long and you know how important this show is to me. So having you here is really special.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Normally we're in front of a classroom or a group of people, but now we're on computers and it's fun.
But not today. Yeah, we're in the virtual recording studio. And you and I have talked about this a lot, this topic. And so I want to give the audience some context before we dive in. So tell us a little bit about your journey that got you to where you are today.
Sure. You know what? I don't want to start way back when I was a kid, but I've always been enamored with human behavior. Initially in college, I wanted to be a psych major and I wanted to be a therapist where I helped people. I've always had this deep desire to help people. And then I was told, I had some good advice that said, if you're not sure what you want to do, major in business. Right. So I got into business. And as I started my career, I really gravitated toward the learning and development, as that's where our paths crossed. Right. I loved interacting with people. I loved learning about them. And so I really dedicated, if you look at the books on my shelf, everything is about human behavior, how we act, why we act the way we do, what our body language says. And you mentioned, I led sales and I've been in these revenue operations leadership roles or the sales guy or whatever you think of. But that's all about human behavior. It's all about connecting with the person that you're talking to. It's about understanding. It's about listening, and it's about all of those things. And so really, I started my career in the learning and development, and I really gravitated toward that initial phase of really understanding a business and understanding a person, what makes them tick, and helping develop solutions that will help them. And so, I somehow got into the marketing side of the world. where again, it's human behavior. Everything we buy is based on emotion. From a Q-tip, why do you buy a Q-tip versus, Q-tip's the brand versus a cotton swab? There's a reason. It's an emotional reason. Maybe it's the comfort that the consistency is going to be there, or that those break in your ear, or and it doesn't feel good, or it's the money. So there's an emotional reason why you buy it. And I just love tapping in. I love tapping into that. So that's how I got to where I am. And I pride myself on really being a consultant or a coach versus, traditional way.
And I've seen you in a variety of contexts. I've seen you in a sales role. I've seen you in a facilitation and a coaching role and in a leadership role. And you are all about connection. You connect very quickly with people. And you know that about yourself. That is a strength. You use humor as a value of yours and something you're incredibly witty and funny and just easy to connect in that way. So talk a little bit about, let's just dive right in. That's one of the reasons I wanted you to have this conversation with me, is because I'm curious from your perspective, because you're also such a guy's guy. So I'm curious from your perspective, you heard me tee this conversation up with the Brene Brown quote that vulnerability is the birthplace of connection. Do you see that? And what's your perspective on vulnerability?
I absolutely see it. Vulnerability has transformed my personal relationships and also my professional. You and I talked about this. Gosh, we might have been having drinks or dinner or something where we were talking about when I finally embraced vulnerability in my personal life, I saw my personal relationships really flourish and grow. I mean, I'm a 50-year-old man, and to qualify this guy, I was in the military. I'm a lifelong athlete. I'm like all those stereotypes for a guy's guy, right? But I'm also, inside, like most men, we have a heart and we have this sensitive inside that we've been taught our whole lives to shield. And everything from in sports, never show weakness. There's a scene in Varsity Blues where the running back he said, "How you feeling?" And he said, "I'm dog tired, my knees." And he said, the coach stops him, "Never show weakness. Never show weakness. Look at this guy over here. He gave his heart out there, and this guy over here just got a concussion." And they were admiring that. You're tough. I have a disfigured finger, a wide receiver. I have a disfigured finger that I hurt in a game, and they just pulled on it, linked it together, get back in there, get back in and play. And that was a badge of honor, right? Rub some dirt on it. You've heard all those phrases that we were taught growing up. And so I think we've been taught to fight our human nature, to love and to be more free with how we feel. And again, I'm being very general here, but in general, men are less expressive about how they're feeling. They're less likely, they're more likely to make fun of their friend, to bust their chops than they are to tell them they love them. And so I've seen in my personal relationships where I had to do I was in therapy to try and improve things that were going on in my life. And my therapist, we worked for 2 years on being more vulnerable, and it wasn't comfortable at all. It's still sometimes not comfortable, but every time I've done it, I've benefited.
So how do you define vulnerability? What does that mean? You said every time I'm vulnerable, it's been valuable. Like, what does vulnerability look like? What is it?
I think there's levels to vulnerability. There's like this surface level of vulnerability, and that's like admitting you were wrong. Sometimes that's hard, right? Especially at work. Admitting you messed up and saying, "You know what, I was wrong." We have a value at home that the boys and I talk about. We say, just own it. Own your stuff. That's what we say. Own it. You come to me, you mess up, and you say, and own it. But if I find out that you lied or that you tried to get around it, that's when dad will take a different course. But just owning it, right? Admitting that you were wrong. That's a surface level. Then it goes on to maybe a deeper level where it's that true understanding of yourself and letting somebody know that, Friday at 3:00, I'm not at my best. I'm glad I'm here and this is a great end to my week, but I'm a morning person. I get up at 5:30 and I'm raring to go. You remember that. In the office, I was usually one of the first one, if not the first one in the office, because that's how I'm wired. And so maybe it's letting somebody know, hey, you know what? You set a meeting with me at 4:00. I'm not going to be at my best. They don't want to hear that. You're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to always be at your best, right? But we're human. at our core, we're humans. And I think that's that next level. And then if you dig even deeper, it's that having the emotional intelligence to know why you act a certain way, why things impact you, the way things impact you a certain way. I had a very vulnerable conversation with my boss recently when it came to compensation. And I told her the story. I said, I don't have I don't have family money to rely on. I said, I'm me. In fact, if anything, sometimes I'm the one in the family that people come to if they want some money or they want some financial support. And, it's important to me, and compensation is something that's very important to me. And it's not the only thing in the workplace. And you and I have had lots of conversations about that, but gave a little understanding, of seeing my mom at the dinner table growing up. I was, my parents were divorced. My mom back then, your parents, and my dad was very involved in my life. But back then, the custody thing, you'd see your dad like every other weekend. And I'd see my mom at the dinner table every month with all these bills in front of her and crying because she didn't have enough money to pay the bills. And that stuck with me. And so my baggage going into it and so on the surface, my boss or my company might think of me as a pain in the butt. Why is he harping on this? Why is it so important? But that level of understanding, but is that something you talk about at work? Remember, we're not supposed to bring personal things into work.
Right.
This was what we were taught.
But the fact that you are aware of that, think about how that definitely is integrated into all of your interactions because you know that about yourself.
Yeah.
I really like the levels. For me, the levels help because something I think a lot about is the environment, one in which it's safe for me to be vulnerable. And so it's not like I'm just like bleh, vomiting out the treasure chest of everything about myself. It's at a base level. I can willingly say, you know what, I'm struggling here, or I messed up here, or that just acknowledgement that I'm off a little bit.
Yeah. And what's interesting about it, right? I've always said that I've always felt trust and respect are the two most important parts of any relationship, work or personal. And so we always talk about building trust at work. But then on the other side, it's a little bit ironic that it was, don't bring in your personal life. Don't bring this into the workplace. Be tough. Be that fearless leader, which I think is the worst statement ever. Fearless leader? What's wrong with having fear? What's wrong with saying, you know what? I need you. And if I didn't have you, I'd be in trouble right now. Boy, how does that make that other person feel? And if we're vulnerable, when you tell me that you messed up, what's that do for our trust versus if you tried to hide it or made an excuse or didn't acknowledge it? That's when I say it's transformative. It helps develop a deeper level of trust and respect because you see them differently.
Yes. And it creates this opening, which is different because so much of the time, like, what are we talking about? There have been so many times throughout my career, it's like, we're not talking about the real thing. We spend so much time up here. So you're giving us some really good insight on how to be vulnerable and what that looks like at different levels. What can I do as a female who is craving vulnerability with my partners, with my clients, with my male colleagues? What can I do to encourage that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. It's sort of like exercise, right? And people get into exercise and they're like, I always say, you don't want to go from sitting on the couch to CrossFit. And no offense to the CrossFit listeners out there, it's fantastic. But if you've never worked out and you go to CrossFit, it's like shocking everything in your whole life. And is it sustainable, right? You'll post every day on Facebook for a month and then it goes away, right? But what if it started with every day I do 10 push-ups and I walk around the block? And so I think vulnerability, same thing. You don't have to jump in with telling your life story or jump in and start crying, but maybe start with, I'm going to be intentional about admitting and letting them know when I was wrong. I'm going to be intentional about telling them some of my strengths. And you said, what can I do? If you start it, it's interesting, the reaction. And that was what someone had told me. Someone who's very important to me said that if you start it, watch the reaction. And I was telling you this, I have probably, it's over 10 10 guy friends in my life that I say I love you to, and they say I love you back. And we're buddies, right? We go to a football game. It's like, I love you, man.
Have you always done that?
No.
So this is a new thing. You're just telling the men in your life that you love them.
And what's cool about it is a group of, we have a group of us from back home that we grew up from the time we were 4 years old through college. We've been friends from that time, and we're still, and we have our own group chat. And it started over the last 3 years. We're all the same age. We're all 50, right? And it started in the last 3 years, and it started with a little bit of vulnerability here. And I mean, it's all love. We went from ripping each other. We've ripped everything from who we dated to how we looked to how we dressed at this time to dropping a ball in the critical game to all the mean things you can think of to say to now it's all love. A couple of them have gone through cancer, and we're just like, I love you, man. I'm here for you. Anything. And it's really been cool to see that.
What impact does that shift have on your relationships with those guys?
So much deeper. We're being more intentional about seeing each other now. We're being more intentional about the things we say and the things we do and the information that we give. So now everybody's more free to say, well, you know what? I'm going through this right now. Whereas we were always taught, be tough, keep that in. Don't show that. You don't talk. Guys don't talk about that stuff. Let's talk about other things. And it's really changed those relationships, and it's changed my relationships with other friends as well.
Are you seeing that kind of shift in the workplace? I mean, you and I have been in the workplace now for over 20 years, which is so hard to believe.
30.
30? Oh, that's right. You're a few years older than me. No, so you're like a year older. But yeah, Jeremy said to me, for our listeners, Jeremy said to me, listen, like, now that we're 50, I'm like, hey, let's be clear, mister. Like, I am not yet 50. Do not put that on me just yet.
Yeah, I mislabeled you there.
Uh-huh.
I would say absolutely. We were raised by a generation that you didn't talk about anything. Remember, think about it. You didn't talk about money. It was impolite to ask any questions about something. Again, the roles, there were gender roles, right?
Never use the word anxiety.
Never use the word anxiety. You didn't wear a helmet when you rode your bike, right? You sat in the back of a truck. Like how we survived, I have no idea. You drank out of the water, out of the hose, and you stayed outside. And there were so many things about it that made us tough. And I'm so thankful for the childhood that I had and the generation. Now we're raising the children.
Yeah.
And I think it's a different level. We sit at the table, the boys, and we talk about feelings. I never talked about feelings with my dad. And I tell my dad everything, but feelings,
Yeah, you are raising two boys, and the conversations you're having with your boys are very different. And no doubt that's going to have a huge impact on them.
Oh, yeah.
Your dad would not have been doing a podcast talking about being more vulnerable.
Oh, no.
At the age of 50.
No, he's gonna listen because my dad's my biggest fan, and he's gonna be like, "Is he talking about feelings here?" And actually, my dad has gone. Case in point, my dad's gone way more vulnerable. So this is this guy's pushing 80. He's gonna be mad at me for rounding up, but he's pushing 80, and he's more vulnerable now. He's the "I love you" and "Hey, how you doing?" And all of that. And he always said love, but he was always like more of like growing up, we had a handshake. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to give you this handshake." He goes, "That's me telling you I love you." Again, the macho, we had our own handshake that said we loved you so that we knew. He always wanted me to know he loved, always told me he was proud of me. Don't get me wrong. But the level of, we talk deep about feelings, how others feel, empathy. Boys and I talk about empathy a lot.
Yeah. So what's the connection between empathy and vulnerability?
It's interesting. So empathy, right? To see through the eye of the other. It's understanding. I think with the tie there is, by me being vulnerable, I'm trying to help you understand me, which is going to help me understand you, which is that. So I think there's a direct correlation there, but it's you taking an assertive step to that, because if you understand me, I'm going to understand you. And if we understand each other better, then we're going to show each other more empathy.
I love that. Yeah, I like some of these other words because as you said that about your dad, my dad is also pushing 80. He will also be offended at the rounding up, but I think it's that word, Jeremy. Like my dad would be like, "Ooh, vulnerability." But my dad is such a loving, compassionate guy. Like would give anyone anything. So like maybe it's just using different words too. I was talking to I think I shared this with you. My boyfriend and I were talking about vulnerability and he was talking about compassion. It's like, yes, I mean, compassion is a human response that we all so get.
Yeah, but showing, and maybe what he was talking about there is showing the compassion. See, we didn't do that growing up. When we were on the playground and the kid got his tooth knocked out, we laughed because we didn't know, we weren't the ones running in to get him the gauze and everything, all of that was sort of like,
Oh, it's a great point. So it's in us, we get it, but we grew up in a generation where it wasn't modeled for us. It wasn't shown to us. And I think men less so than women. I perhaps got a lot more compassion from my mom and my dad because I was a girl.
yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think we got a lot of the. I mean, you think about the phrases that came out of our generation: "Suck it up, Buttercup." If you've ever heard
Mhm.
that one, right? Suck it up, and never show weakness, and never see a grown man cry. Remember that? That was afraid. That was afraid. Now you don't hear that as much. And so back to your question about generation, you don't hear that as much because I think our generation said, you know what? I think we're a little bit more in touch, and we're gonna show a little bit more of that compassion. We're gonna show. So there's where the compassion, because he might be talking about showing compassion by being vulnerable and by talking about things that were taboo for us to talk about.
Well, in their actions, aren't they? Like demonstrating compassion, demonstrating empathy.
Yeah.
But it takes a level of vulnerability to do that because it's risky. It's messy. You don't know what the response is.
And it's understanding humans, and to back to Mason talking about empathy. I think the other night my son he was really upset, and our personalities are the same. He's just me, like times two maybe. He's karma for me, right? So everything, and he has this beautiful little mind. He has a great sense of humor, and he's feisty. And we were playing a game, and he got really upset, and he's 10, right? So he's kind of acting out like a 10-year-old would. Now my instincts are to fight him, right? I'm your dad. You need to not talk that way. You need to, so those are my instincts. But I actually knew why he was, because I knew the moment, I knew the meaning behind it. I dug in to understand him. He's very sentimental. This was a game that we used to play with somebody that's no longer in our lives. So he was having this moment. And I said, it's okay. I just said, and he kept fighting me. And I said, it's okay, buddy. I know you're upset. It's okay. And I just said, and then I said, I'm going to let you have some time. So I went upstairs. 5 minutes later, he comes up and he gives me a hug and he said, I'm sorry. And I said, I know you're upset and I know why you're upset and it's okay. And I said, you're going to learn as you grow up to be able to express yourself differently. But right now, as a child, that's how you express yourself, because he's not mature enough to be able to say, I'm sad because of this. But I think that's a conversation we're having that the generation before would have never had that conversation.
Exactly.
So we're getting there, and it's showing up in the workplace now.
Well, what I love about that is, I mean, I would just describe that as giving him the space to feel whatever he's feeling, not judging it, not evaluating it. And it takes a level of vulnerability to do that because we want our people to be okay. And so them not being okay is hard.
It is.
So let's transfer it to the workplace. So can you think of a situation recently at work where you showed up in that way? Because that's how you show up.
Oh my gosh. It's so funny. So the classic, fight or flight, and I'm more of a fight than a flight, and I'm more of a alpha. I have awareness. I work on it. And so, I had a situation at work where we did a big restructure and we're growing really rapidly. And, with growth, and we're acquiring companies, and then we have all these new people. We're all over the country and we're remote. So we don't have the luxury that you and I had of sitting across the table and really connecting, right? So a lot of it, you're meeting people, only over Zoom, right? And so we did this restructuring, and it was how we were handling our accounts. Now I'm responsible for revenue. So at the end of the year, I'm evaluated pretty much on one thing. Did the revenue go up or not? Right? Which is why I'm in their role. Their role, their project efficiency. And so we tried to do our job. If you've heard of RACI charts, right? With the responsible account, we did this RACI, and project managers are good project managers because they're black and white and they follow rules. Salespeople live in this gray area, right? Those of us that are, and it's because it's because it's all about how the person's reacting. Every situation is a little different. You can't just go 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to happen this way. It doesn't work that way. Well, as we were going through this, there were a lot of items on there that I thought, this is silly that I'm working on. I should never touch this. That's not a good use of my time. That's not going to raise revenue. And I know based on my experience, there's no way. And they were, no, this is your job. And so we were having it, and we were just like, we're kind of doing this. And we got into a bit of a power struggle, and they're like, well, it's on the RACI chart. You need to do this. And then I'm like, but I'm at the EVP level. You're, it was kind of, I didn't say it like, but it was kind of that tension, right? Of like, wait a second. And so we were having this, and they were going up their side and I was going up, and then I had this moment, and I'm sitting there like, what are we doing? And so I set a meeting with 2 people, and I just said, we started focusing on next year and what we're doing. And it was more of an understanding that, well, maybe if they understand what I'm held accountable for, or where we're trying to go with this and how that impacts them. And so I went through the numbers, and I started going through what I was held accountable for, where I was coming from in this. And then they were, explaining a bit of theirs, but they were like, they had never seen the numbers. I just assumed they had. Like, I didn't know that they didn't know that. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't know where we were driving for. And while we give a lot of information, we're very good about that as a company. In this particular scenario, I just assumed that they had it, right? And so I think we were both making assumptions. We walk away from this meeting, and I felt really good. I thought they felt really good. And then I got a follow-up message about thanking me for the time, for the understanding, and thank you for, your willingness. And I also let them know I had a rough year, and I didn't go into the details. So I went down a level, and I just said, you know what? I've had some things going on in my person. And I said, I really try not to bring it into the workplace. And I think that it doesn't, but subconsciously everything does a bit to a degree. And I said, I think my patience and tolerance for things are down. And, for anything that I've done, I want us to start fresh. And I'm sorry if it came across the wrong way. So now I think we all feel better going into 2025 with a fresh start. And yeah, it felt good on both sides of it.
What was the response when you said, like, I've had a tough year? Did you feel like some softening there?
Yeah, definitely. I can see it on it. I love reading body language. That's one of my favorites. And I could see the look on both their faces. It was just this like, oh, because we're humans. We think and we feel.
And
right?
do you think, and on some level, they probably knew that. And so the acknowledgement of it was really refreshing.
Yeah. And then that's the other, people aren't dumb. They know, people know. It's like your kids. They would say your kids are watching and seeing everything, right? And they know, and people know a lot more than we give them credit for. And sometimes it's just opening the door to have that conversation.
Yeah, and not pretending. I mean, we're good at like persevering and gonna keep going, and it's the suck it up, buttercup. Like keep my head up and keep going. But yeah, we can be both productive and falling apart at the same time. I mean, 2024 was a really interesting year for both of us. We both exited a relationship in 2024. We both have lots of new things we're stepping into, and it's a vulnerable place to be. But the growth, but I will look back on 2024 with so much gratitude because I grew so much in trusting myself.
Yeah, you grow through everything, right? Any experience that we have. And that was part of being vulnerable too, is acknowledging where you are and where you want to be and being grateful. You were always the best at being grateful. That was something that I really learned from you. You were always so good at being grateful. I was always so good at focusing on what I needed to do, right? And I think part of that comes from sports, right? It was never good enough. Your coach was always like breaking down the film, like, you scored a touchdown, but your route was broken off a little bit. I'm like, but I scored, right? And so I think there was a little bit of that. And you were always, very good about saying you've got to be grateful for where you are, where you're going. And I take that seriously. And that's something that I think part of it being vulnerable is you're vulnerable with yourself too. That's the other part we're not talking. You have to be vulnerable with yourself and acknowledge, hey, you know what? I don't have to be perfect. We're human beings.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that where it starts? Is being really honest about how you're feeling. I mean, it's why I have a feelings wheel behind me. I mean, I've had that for the last couple of years because my therapist helped me recognize that I like the positive side of the feelings wheel. And so now I'm trying to feel all of it and being honest about how I'm really feeling. I will literally pull it out. Like, for example, anger was, I would have named so much negative emotion as anger. But as I dive into the feelings wheel, a lot of times it's not anger, it's embarrassment, or it's feeling left out, or it's jealousy. There's something. And in the awareness of that, it's a very different response than an angry response.
Anger is an expression. It's not a feeling, right? Anger is an expression. We always say, I feel angry. It's actually in this expression. You feel sad, or you feel hurt, or you feel this, but you're just expressing it this way. It's your word. We said that that's a guy who said men will express those feelings in anger, whereas oftentimes a female might cry and we used to talk about that in diversity. It's like, hey, your anger and cussing and this and that is the same. You're feeling the same thing. You're just expressing it differently.
Yeah. So to that, in the workplace, Jeremy, when women are vulnerable, what's that like? I mean, I've been told lots of times, like, oh gosh, you don't want to show emotion. You want to keep it very focused on business and logic and facts. And I know there's been a big shift, right? The Barbie movie, like my favorite quote from the Barbie movie was Lawyer Barbie, that I hold both logic and emotion simultaneously, and it doesn't diminish my power. It actually strengthens it.
Yeah. I think there's a misnomer out there. I think sometimes we think that men are the big bad wolf, and they've got that they're around here going, man, if a woman doesn't walk in the room and she's not this, and you know this, we were on a leadership team together, 3 women and me. My boss is female. My boss's boss is female. My last boss was female. My boss before that was female. I've been surrounded by female leaders my whole career, right? And so I can speak from and this is coming from the guy's guy. I can tell you that when there's an overcompensation, it's very clear.
What do you mean by that?
When it's very clear that you're trying to, I forget, there's somebody that we both know really well that would overcompensate for fear and for sadness and for not being sure. And so overcompensation is when a person feels that, they come at it. And I think it's that there was this, like you said, there's an expectation that you have to be, as a woman, you need to be perfect now because you're in this man's world. We're not in a man's world. It's not a man's world. It's a people world. And I think if you ask the average person out there, male or female or otherwise, they're going to say, this is not this world that you think it is.
Well, okay, I love this. And because we are good friends, I can say it. Isn't it easy for you to say that because you are a man?
Yeah, it's a lot easier. I'll admit it. It's easier for me to say that, but I could tell you that there's lines, right? And so one thing with vulnerability, you also can't, vulnerability is not coming into the office on Friday and be like, man, I got really hammered last night and I'm really foggy today. And that's not what I'm talking about. That's crossing a professional line.
Yes. And could also be the overcompensating.
Yeah. That's the
Well, and going back to connection is what we're working towards. So you got to know your people and know what they want and need also. And that would not be helpful in most situations.
No, I had a moment I'll give you an example with one of my female bosses, and where showed some vulnerability and it helped us connect. Very business focused, has an MBA from a prestigious school, has an amazing work history, has been an executive at major organizations, very impressive, extremely intelligent, can be very task focused at times, right? And you know me, I'm a human. Sometimes I'm like, let's not talk about tax. Let's not talk about this. Tell me if you think I'm doing a good job, right? And so that's what gets. And so one time I said, sometimes I don't know if you just tolerate me, if I get on your nerves, right?
Yeah.
And we had this really vulnerable moment. She said, my husband would tell you the same thing. And it's something that I've worked on. If there's 10 good things, I'll focus on the one thing that needs to be improved. And that's how I'm wired. That moment, I said, I get her now. So every time that we have this situation, I don't get upset about it.
It's just acknowledging more of who you are and just being honest about that.
Right. And so so back to the in the workplace, I would say be human.
Be human.
I think the next phase is, let's not talk about gender roles in the workplace. Let's talk about being human in the workplace. And being human in the workplace is showing a level of vulnerability and showing that you're human and watching how people connect with you, because they will. They're going to respect you more. They're not going to look at you and say, man, I can't believe that person has no fear. They're going to say, I have the same fear. There's a scene on a movie, because I love movies. And I'm rambling, probably because I'm nervous. But there's a scene in this movie called The Replacements. It was a football team, right? And Keanu Reeves is in this movie. And the coach is trying to get them to talk about football and what they fear on the football field, because they have to, they're all the replacement players. And he goes, what do you fear? And everybody just kind of quiet. The one guy goes, spiders, sir. I fear spiders. And this other guy's like, yeah, man, I hate spiders, man. Those big old spiders. And they all start. He's like, it's not about spiders. Like, he's getting kind of frustrated. He's like, oh man, I fear snakes. And they start going down all this road. Because what happened, and it's a funny scene of a movie, but if you think about the depth of what that's actually saying is, it took that one person to say something, and then it opened the floodgates. And I think sometimes that's what we do is if that one person will just show a little bit of vulnerability. You start off a meeting by saying, hey, what's one thing right now that you're nervous about? Could you imagine what that would open up for everybody on your team?
Oh my gosh, Jeremy, that's so good. What's one thing that you're nervous about right now? Because it highlights our humanity. My big takeaway, let's not talk about being male or female. Let's talk about being human. I mean, it's the human experience. That's the thing we can all relate to. Our experiences are different because our orientations are different, period. But we are humans. And isn't that what we're all trying to just be more of? And the vulnerability challenge, the compassion challenge, the empathy challenge. I mean, there's a challenge for me. There's a challenge for you, but it's different because my experience is different than yours. So like, I've got to do my work to where do I have to drop my guard in order to be more of who I am? I mean, that's going to look different for every single human.
It is. And think about how this all ties into what the amazing human you raised said about empathy, because it's all understanding. If we're human and we're understanding, and it's the empathy, it all comes back to that. And it's like, who takes the first step into building empathy is showing vulnerability.
Amen. Yeah, I'm going to just tell our listeners, I was telling you that before we hit record. So Mason, my 22-year-old who is working in a hospital in Cleveland, I was telling her today that I was hosting Jeremy King on the podcast to talk about men being more vulnerable at work. And she laughed and she said, I'm not sure if it's that. She was like, but I want them to have more empathy. Yeah.
Because if they showed more understanding and more ability, or overtly tried to understand, she's going to be more vulnerable because she's going to feel more comfortable, and then they're going to feel more vulnerable. And then again, it's understanding is everything, because we fear what we don't understand and we fight what we don't understand.
Yes. And we all want desperately to be seen and understood.
Seen and understood. Yeah.
Yes.
And the minute we have a connection with somebody, we talked about this before. It's that, you're driving in traffic and that person cuts you off and you're upset and you're saying or doing whatever, and you're thinking the worst. They're selfish and they cut me out and they don't care and they don't do this. And then you realize, oh, that's Andrea. And then you're just like, oh, Andrea wasn't paying attention. Andrea must be.
Or she's in a hurry. Maybe she got bad news. Yeah.
And same action, different response because you're Andrea and I know you and I understand you versus somebody I don't know and I don't understand. And if we spent more time knowing and understanding people, imagine what that would do in the workplace.
It's hard to hate people up close.
It
Brene
is.
Brown said that.
It is.
Oh my goodness. This is why I need to host my friends on this show more often. How did 40 minutes fly by? I love it.
I feel like I rambled a lot though. So,
well, you know, it takes a lot of vulnerability to hop on a podcast feed and talk about being vulnerable.
Yeah.
So thank you for modeling the way for us. And thank you for trusting me. Yeah. I mean, I just sent you a voice message a few weeks ago, like, hey, I've got this idea. And you came right back to me with sure.
Yeah, I was in. I trust you. I was excited to come in.
Next time we'll have to invite our friend George Hanlon to join us for a conversation. What would he say about vulnerability at work?
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
George, if you're listening, you'll say, don't. No, he would. I think George would have interesting perspective and it would be a lot more entertaining because he would argue with us.
He would argue with us. Yeah. I love that. Jeremy, I love you.
Yeah, I love you too.
I'm so grateful for you. I've learned so much from you throughout my career. I really have. My big takeaways from today: the levels of vulnerability. I'm an all-in kind of person, and sometimes I do think I dump out the whole treasure chest, and I don't need to. And I need to pay more attention to what's going to be helpful to the people around me. And it couldn't where's an opening? Where's a place to create some depth? And then the just being human, focusing on the human experience. And all your stories are always entertaining.
Yeah. I don't lack for stories.
Never. You always have a good story. If our listeners want to connect with and find you, Jeremy, where's a good place to do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest place. Jeremy L. King.
Jeremy L. King.
Yeah, there's lots of Jeremy Kings out there, I found out.
Are there? Okay. Well, you're the only Jeremy King I know. Okay, so to close it out, I'm going to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions. These are connection questions. I like to always end with just something fun and personal. So one fun and relatable and one a little deeper. So Jeremy, what was your first car?
My first car was a 1980 Toyota Corona.
Corona?
Like the virus, before the virus came, it was a Corona.
Wow. What color was your Toyota Corona?
It was white and it was a hatchback.
Oh,
it was super awesome.
How long were you driving around in that Corona?
2 or 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Do
you have fond memories of the Corona, or was it awful?
It was kind of cool. It was a stick shift, and it was different. There weren't any others around. So,
okay. Well, yeah, you needed something a little different out there.
Yeah.
Because you grew up in Colorado.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Okay. Question number 2. What do people misunderstand about you? And what do you wish people got?
I think my humor is sometimes mistaken for aloofness. And I think that, humor is sometimes used as a shield. So sometimes when you're feeling a certain way, they talk about comedians and how sometimes comedians are some of those that are hurting the most. And sometimes people use humor to shield things. So back to the vulnerability, I think sometimes people view humor as being aloof, but I'm paying attention to everything and how you respond to my jokes and the things that people say. I hear it all. So I think that I'm actually very serious. At my core, I'm an actually very serious, deep person, but sometimes my humor comes across like, nah, he's just this fun-loving. He's just out for a good time.
Has it been a shield for you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've used it my whole life.
And you're good at it.
Yeah, I love making people laugh, but it's been a shield my whole life.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, not today. I mean, I only laughed at you at least maybe once or twice. So you weren't that funny.
Kevin, pretty new. I wasn't. I was like, I'm not going to be funny today. I'm just coming straight in, being human.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you, my friend. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast to never miss a Being at Work story.